Welcome to the Smoke and Rope Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Basore, as always, and today we have a special guest, Executive Director, Mr. Andrew Brisbo. Andrew, thanks for being on the show again.
My pleasure, Ryan. Always glad to be with you.
Cool. And with us today, Kevin over at Truu Cannabis. Kevin, what's going on today?
Oh, not much. Doing some running around, just trying to get my other facilities up and running and licensed. And I do have some news, though, some good news. I talked to Josie today, Josie Scroggins, and on Friday I have my appointment for meeting with Barton Morris for my expungement. So things are starting to move along. Anybody that's trying to get their marijuana cases expunged, contact the Great Lakes Expungement Network. You can reach them at 269-214-4495. Or you can look at them up at greatlakesexpungement.com.
Awesome. That's awesome. Glad to hear that. And we're starting to get people expunged, so it's working. It's exciting. And Tom, not in Kalkaska, out of the state. Well, care to elaborate?
No, I'm in an undisclosed location currently, but I'm happy to be on the show today.
Okay.
Always a pleasure to have the director on the show, and being so open to talk to us. This is looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, we've had Director Brisbo on the show before, and everybody that listens to the show knows who he is. But I was actually, Director was just up at the MICIA event. It was a great event. Was up talking, gave a talk to everybody. We were having a conversation how it's nice, Andrew, that you talk to the bud tender and the owner of the company and treat them the same way. And do your research and your due diligence. And first time I met you, I remember I saw you playing trivia, and you had a two-man team that was we were barely beating with like 10 people. So I knew you're pretty smart. And it was before 2019, before you got this position, and I think you had talked to a few people, maybe Robin Schneider, and said, "Hey, this is Ryan," and told him about me, and then all of a sudden you came up to me the next week and introduced yourself, and I thought, man, this guy does better background checking than I do, so he's probably pretty good at the job. But I appreciate that. But today we were gonna focus on originally the new basically bulletin and the new directive that as far as with the edibles, the packaging, and keeping them out of children's hands. Appealing to them, and then also maybe worrying about looking exactly like other trademark candy bars and things like that. But then just this morning we saw that there's another bulletin, and it talks about clones, and so would love to jump into both of those, and you can take it. Start with whatever one you want, and if you want to give a little background and the analysis behind it.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the edibles and the packaging. That's something that has always been a critical focus of the agencies to ensure that products aren't accidentally ingested, particularly by minors. And as we started to get back out into the field and looking at some of the media coverage around the national increase in poison control center calls related to young people accidentally ingesting marijuana products, and some other coverage about large candy companies starting to sue cannabis manufacturers who are making products they think are infringing on their intellectual property, we thought it was a good opportunity for us to provide some clarification on how we interpret and apply the rules that are on the books. And we think it's beneficial for everyone to see that versus handle those on a one-off basis. When we start to see issues that are persistent across the board, we've long held that we'll issue guidance so that everyone understands what we're seeing. We can encourage best practices. Everyone's aware of things that we see as issues before we have to actually show up in a licensed establishment and potentially go down a corrective action or disciplinary path. Better that we just describe to everyone how we interpret the rules and the laws on the books so that there's clarity across the board. And obviously, I haven't talked to anyone that is interested in getting marijuana products in the hands of minors, save the few number of qualified patients we have who are minors. So there is a pathway for medicinal use to get access to the market. But beyond that, we have standards for packaging that's been on the books for quite a while in terms of adopting standards that require that packages be resealable and child resistant. But when we were looking at some of the things that we were seeing in terms of pictures on the packages, or wanting clarification to be clear to those that are of the age that they can read that this is, say, not just a gummy, but it is a marijuana infused or THC infused gummy, so that everyone who's reading that knows that it's a marijuana product. And then on the immature plant sales, that's another thing we've been working on for quite some time. We deliberately put that in the rules back last June, and we needed to develop more fully that process on how someone could qualify to make those types of sales, requiring GMP or GACP certification for the grower, and the process by which the plants end up at the sales location. We actually had an ad hoc work group that helped us work on that, because we wanted to hear from the industry. How would the logistics of this work? We didn't have it fully defined, and this is based on the recommendations of that group, we came up with this guidance, and now there's an opportunity to actually sell plants to consumers.
Hey, Andrew, this is Kevin Pybus over at Truu Cannabis. I wanted to quickly thank you for making yourself so readily available for us to have these kind of discussions. This is the second time you've made yourself available for our little show. You've been up to the MICIA conference this last summer. I thought it was a great time. But I did have a quick question for you. When I see things like what you're talking about, I don't disagree with you. 100% I agree with the fact that we got to keep these things out of minors' hands. But I feel like a lot of businesses did have a ton of money invested in packaging, and now we're making a change. I see when I go to the drugstore, we're not allowed to use the marijuana leaf. We're not allowed to use the green cross, and I'm not in disagreement with that. But I do see, specifically a pharmacy here in Lansing that has a big green cross. I think people get confused by it. They don't know what's going on. And then secondarily, you go into the drugstore and you see a marijuana leaf on the front of a drug testing kit. Can you kind of explain what the difference is there, and what you think about that being allowed but not being allowed in another industry?
Well, we focus our regulations on the industry that we regulate, and you raise some logical points, some reasonable points when we make these determinations. I've heard a lot and seen a lot of chatter now about these types of restrictions aren't on alcohol products that are currently available in the market, but at the same time, this is a new and innovative industry. The alcohol industry hasn't had, a 200% increase in the number of poison control center calls over the last year. So it's certainly something we can't ignore. And we want to make sure that there's responsibility in terms of how these products end up in people's hands. And everything is new and is novel. And I think we're all kind of learning together as we see where the risks are. But we've always been clear that our mission as an agency is to protect public health, safety, and welfare, and to allow businesses to succeed. So where we can balance that out, for example, in this circumstance, there's a key issue that we thought we had to correct. We had to provide this clarification on how we're interpreting the existing standards before we, potentially have to engage in tighter restrictions via the rules or the laws if we see other concerns. And we don't want to go down that pathway. If we can encourage compliance with the existing standards and stay ahead of some of these issues, we think that's the way to go about it. But in consideration for the fact, to the point you made about the suppliers or the processors getting months of supply of packaging, that's why we allowed for 6 months, where we're going to focus on issues, offer clarifications, give time for people to be fully compliant, and also provide a pathway where they can modify the packaging that's there, so they don't just have to throw things away either. So we want to be reasonable as we offer these clarifications and implement standards.
No, I think those are really good points, and I'm glad that you guys are now allowing for stuff like that, where we're setting timelines to make it so that we can adapt as we move forward. So that's great. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Well, we know aren't going to actually always self-regulate themselves, but I do want to talk about ability when you're talking about a regulated substance like cannabis, and I keep all of everything that I have is in a lockbox. Nobody can get to it. I have the combination, and I feel that all people should keep all of their edibles and all cannabis products locked away. Are there options for people out there that don't necessarily have that type of resource for to go out and access lock boxes, maybe within their community, or other programs available for people? And
yeah, I think you make a great point, Tom. And that's always been one of the key issues, is we control what happens at the store. But once the products are at home, obviously we can't regulate that behavior. But that's why we do take some of these preventative measures. We think about how the packaging and the types of products available might be viewed within a home setting. But I think one great resource is a lot of local public health departments through the grant funding program that the agency oversees are offering free lock boxes for marijuana products as well. So I don't know how many of them do that, but I know it's multiples. And I think Robin Snyder from the MICIA even had that in her quote in our press release that those programs are available. So I would suggest doing some outreach into your local public health department. They may have resources for you.
Right. That's cool. So I have a question. It's obviously for edibles. Do you foresee, as far as on, flower 8 packages, seeing some of the same rules as far as whether it be cartoon or fruit or anything like that?
So a lot of those standards are universally applicable to all products in terms of being appealing to minors. We've really focused on the edible and infused products because the products themselves could be easily confused. I think it's less likely that a young person is, going to accidentally roll up the flower and smoke it. And if they might eat it, but I'd be surprised if they did that too. And ultimately, that's not really as much of a risk because it's not activated yet. Should they consume it? So, we try and focus on what the key issues are. Ultimately, what we're trying to convey here is there's a responsible way to go about this. Every law that's on the books was written with a certain amount of attention paid to preventing youth access and making sure that things were done in a responsible manner. And that's why the agency exists. We want to be flexible and allow businesses to advertise their products, but we have to make sure that that's done in a way that won't be confusing to young people.
Okay. A question also on the 3 clones. I think it's great that people are going to be able to build their brands and sell actually legally to the consumers and under without worrying about any blowback from the police. But what I did notice the difference that now, and you mentioned it, that it's GM standards now for clones. It's not for flower, but for clones. You said you had a work group. How did that kind of come about where the GMP was decided on?
We actually had that in the rules all along. So that
Okay.
wasn't something that was up for discussion in the work group. But what we were trying to consider was all the products as they move through the supply chain have to be subject to state testing standards. But you can't really test a plant. We didn't want to implement the program that way. So the GACP certification for the grower is a mechanism by which we can ensure that this grower meets certain standards and that we feel comfortable then that the plants can move through the supply chain as a whole plant versus being harvested and then the product being tested, so that we make sure that the plant that ends up in the hands of the consumer and that they're taking home is free of any banned pesticides, for example.
Important for most producers in the regulated space to start thinking about GMP across the board regardless, because as federal legalization comes, that's going to become more of a conversation you need to be having, and you need to be ready for that if you want to actually sell in the market, however it unfolds.
I think that's a great point, Tom. And we've always looked at the state standards with an eye on what we thought federal standards would look like in the future, so that business operators in the state were already conforming with what those standards would be at some point in the future. And you're absolutely right. We try to incentivize and provide benefits, and we'll be publishing something probably relatively soon related to that for any grower, I think processors as well, who get the GMP or GACP certification, that there'll be a financial incentive for them to do that. Choosing not to go the mandatory approach, but I think you make a great point, Tom. Eventually, it's likely in a national legal market, you'll probably have to have that standard being met.
That proactive approach. Sure.
You and Tom both mentioned federal legalization, and a couple weeks ago we saw an introduction, first time of some language to try to make that happen. What was your take on what you had read and what they're proposing, and do you expect that the federal government will reach out to people like yourself, directing states for their input on how we can implement this and make this so it's a success across the country?
My initial impression is that federal bills are even harder to read than state bills. I don't like the formatting. I'm used to the way we do things in Michigan, but there were some interesting concepts, and it's far-reaching. In terms of the strategic approach and whether it has success, I'll leave that to the experts who would know more than I do. Our goal, and I'm working on this, I co-chair the Federal Policy Committee with our Cannabis Regulators Association group. We did have a preliminary discussion trying to look at the issues, not advocating for anything specific, but drawing attention to issues where there might be concerns. I was pleased to see that, the federal position paper that we produced as a part of that regulators group called out the key issues that we thought needed to be addressed in any federal policy reform. And it appears as though they've, broadly speaking, hit on all those topics. So the devil will be in the details, and we want to be at the table to share a state regulator's approach. And I think from my perspective as well, thinking through what the impacts would be on the Michigan market, which is growing, is successful. I think the businesses and the agency are doing a good job in ensuring it's done in a responsible way, and consumers are protected. So we don't want to see that upset with any potential federal changes. So I think it's important that everyone who's a stakeholder in the industry in Michigan and in the country looks at that and make sure their feedback is heard. But I think our organization wants to make sure that state regulators have a seat at the table when that's moving through the process.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out the most to me, and I think to most people when they read the article, I didn't read actually the bill, but I did read some highlights from the bill. But was the tax increase upwards of 25% in the 5th year of the program for producers that are producing above, I think it was $10 million in product a year or something along those lines. As we try to combat the black market, I think one of the things that we struggle with is trying to get it to a price point at the retail that's competitive with the black market and makes it a value for the customer to be able to do that. What do you think of that when you hear a potential of 25% increase in tax?
I think you're right. The taxation is often cited as one piece of a big puzzle in terms of competitiveness with the illicit market. And we've seen in Michigan is now I think greater participation by consumers in the regulated market, and I think a piece of that is prices that are competitive in that space. I think it was always clear that there was going to be some form of federal tax. What the right number on that will be, or the method by which it's taxed, is open to discussion. So I don't have a very well thought out opinion on it at this point, but is something I'm sure is going to be hotly debated.
And for sure with that, and as everyone in the industry knows, we're already getting federally taxed really hard with 280E, and what's the difference on that? But our friend of the show, Weldon Angelos, we had on, is working with the Koch brothers in the Senate there. So hopefully, if they bring some good to it, they'll lower that tax rate for us. But I had a question. You brought up your the national group of regulators you're with, and we see you out at the businesses that you're regulating. You're coming to events. You're speaking on podcasts. Is that common in any other state agencies in Michigan, or is that common in the other states? Can your peers, are they doing the same thing, or are you just out kind of blazing a trail with it?
Well, Ryan, I'm special. I like to do things my own way. The one thing I learned from my dad was you got to work hard. And so I'm going to keep working hard. And I think we recognize at the agency level in Michigan that we didn't know everything. And this is going to be a dynamic industry and hard to keep up with. And a great way to learn about it is to talk to the people who are engaging in the practices, who are seeing issues that we might not think of from a business owner's perspective. And the closer I can be to that personally versus expecting my team to bubble up all those issues to me, I think the better I can do my job, the more informed I can be. I can bring issues to them and force them to work on them and look at things from a different perspective as well. I've been in state government a long time, since 2004. I do a lot more speaking on this topic than I did on say, occupational regulation of engineers and accountants and cosmetologists. But I think a lot of that is because it's novel, it's still growing. But I will always stay engaged with the industry associations, make sure we understand the industry perspective. I rarely say no to speaking engagements. If someone wants to hear about what we're doing, I'm happy to do it and talk specifically to areas that will interest them. I have some speaking engagements coming up with, I'm going to speak to a group of CPAs actually in a little while. Earlier, I think it's a little bit later this month, to talk about the annual financial statements and how CPAs are providing services. So there's a lot of different topics to cover, and I'm happy to lend my perspective where people think it's of value.
Yeah, do you know, are the other regulators in the other states, are they following suit? Do you guys have those conversations on how like the dynamics of each state is and how that group works?
I'm not sure any of them do it quite as much as I do, but they definitely have involvement from various perspectives. I think it all depends on the maturity of your program as well. In the early days of implementing the laws, go back to late 2016, early 2017. I just didn't have the time to be out and doing speaking engagements. There's too much work to be done. But now that we've built out a strong team, and I tell you what, I learned a lot about remote work over the past year, even though I was traveling quite a bit before that, and how much you can accomplish. And you don't have to be in the office in the same place all the time. So having that flexibility, and I can take calls while I'm driving, and hook up from hotels and engage in Zoom calls and so forth, and stay linked up with my team and still get work done. But there's no replacement for speaking to business operators at their businesses, and it also invigorates me when I hear the passion and the stories. Every business owner I've talked to when I visited a facility has some personal experience that they share as to how they ended up in this industry. And I find those stories, very helpful to inform my perspective. So I can consider the personal relationship they have with their business operation when we're, creating a regulatory environment that allows them to succeed.
People are very passionate about cannabis. That's for sure.
So how I saw an update on one of the Facebook pages, not yours, but looks like you were in second place last I checked on the Dapper Dads. Was that a
Ryan,
big?
you got to catch up. I'm in first place now.
Oh, you're in first place. Holy smokes! I think that's
I have
sending
left
them.
ahead.
That's sending some messages to the local Dapper Dads. I'm friends with some of those other guys, at the power of the cannabis industry, I guess. That's awesome,
I
though.
wonder. I wonder if my bid is lead.
Another question I have, something, you heard Kevin talking about our expungement program, and we're doing a lot of other things. There's got a cool announcement coming. It's happening August 11th. Jason Samirsky is getting out of prison for a horrible probation violation type deal. So, but I noticed in the proposed new administrative rules, there's the 300 plant micro license. And does that have any connection to social equity or social equity work group? And what are our chances of getting that? I'm a big fan of them.
So the basis of that wasn't a recommendation that came from the Racial Equity Advisory Work Group, and we did tweak the recommendation as it was presented, but still feel like we're addressing the two primary concerns that were cited as to the limitation on the existing microbusiness model. Those being the cost of processing and the lack of biomass to be sustainable. So we think this model, in increasing the plant count, only allowing that business to sell the flower that they produce, but being able to source the other manufactured products from other processors, will allow them to be competitive. If they have a skill set where they can produce good flower, they can sell that, and then they can have the variety of products that I think is necessary to run a sustainable business. So I don't know what kind of feedback we're going to get on it. Hopefully we hit the sweet spot, and it's something that everyone can support.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of it, and there haven't been that many micro licenses, and as we know, it's probably the business model, getting those longer too. I know you have a heart out. You're a busy man, but one last question, just because we have a lot of interest in them. What's your feel on the lounges, and when some might be opening soon? Or do you have any idea? You've been working on talking to some of the operators?
Yeah, I think the stumbling block there is twofold. One is I don't think a lot of municipalities have opened the doors for those just yet. I think there's confusion about what's allowed and what's not with those license types based on some of the questions I've gotten recently. The folks that have wanted to establish those, I think, are struggling with what does the business model look like. And when we allowed that license type, it was trying to stay ahead of the inevitable questions about it and the interest in social consumption and setting standards so that could be done in a responsible way. And there was a license type for it. What we didn't really provide was how to make it profitable. That's not really our role per se. But I think some folks will come up with creative models, either partnering with temporary events or having close proximity to a sales location that will allow them to be successful. But it's as you all well know, finding a place to put a marijuana business in the state is not the easiest thing in the first place, let alone one where, the sales piece of the operation, which is, I think, what makes it profitable to be a retailer, obviously, you can't necessarily accompany that. So what your structure is to bring in revenue, I think is something people are grappling with at this point.
For sure. Profit venture has to have something else tied with it. And the insurance is also another question, because it's a very, on the liability end, there's a lot of unanswered questions and stuff. I know that's what we're dealing with.
All right.
And I'd had some conversations with folks on the insurance side about whether, what general liability coverage looked like and how much it would cost. And, with the new legislation that just passed that will be effective in October for the dram shop requirements as well, and having another insurance product that will be necessary potentially for those kinds of facilities as well.
Nice.
But also provide some liability protection for folks making sales in the industry as well. It's not an easy license type. And I think, I'm not sure if anyone wants to be first to be the one that figures it out the hard way.
Yeah, no, it's exciting, and obviously COVID, I'm sure, has a role to play in that as well. But I know you have a heart out. We definitely got to get out of here real quick. I want to let Kevin and Tom say goodbye and get you on your next appointment. So go ahead, Kevin.
Hey again, Andrew, I really appreciate you making yourself available for us. I appreciate your candor and everything. You impressed me today when you made a comment about kids eating flour, and that it's not activated and they're not going to get high. That's impressive to me, because that tells me that you're actually digging into this and you're actually taking all this stuff in and learning a lot. And I don't know that everybody else that are direct in other states are doing that kind of stuff. So we appreciate that. We appreciate your understanding and trying to understand where all this is coming from. So thank you for being on the show, and I wish you the best.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Kevin had to say. And also thank you again for always being so accessible. I want to take you up on that rain check, though, for the visit to the on a tour. So next time you're up, people call my people. We'll take a look at the Brisbo.
Tom, I saw a post saying that Willy Wonka had closed the tours, so it looks like you're making an exception. Okay, all right. Director, any final words for the people listening to the show?
I just appreciate the opportunity to get the word out directly. And, as much as you appreciate me being here, I appreciate the chance to put it in my own words versus, having folks try to explain what they think I think. I'm happy to tell anyone what I think and what we're doing. And I'm willing to be accountable for the decisions we make and hear, feedback, even if it's not necessarily positive feedback. And to Tom's point, yeah, I'm getting back out on the road. A lot of travel in September. So anyone who's interested in having me stop by their facility, I like to see all the different types of operations. So just shoot me an email. I'll be happy to stop by.
Thank you. So great show today. Made me kind of think. I remember back in, right after, at the end of 18, beginning of 19, and, people like to complain this or that, but understand how it could have gone if there was a lot of lobbyists trying to get into your position, and that would have been disastrous for our law. So Michigan market is jamming. I think it is the best state to do business in for the little guy, and if a big guy wants to compete, that focus on their own business, then they can succeed too. So with that, thanks for being on, Director, and we'll see everybody next week.